The world doesn't think that the gospel can change your life, but we know that it can. And that's why we want you to hear these stories of transformation, stories of freedom, people getting free from sin and healed from sin because of Jesus. This is Death to Life.
Man, the hard part too is like as I was in this situation, there was serious questions, and Bianca and I were really wondering at times. Like we would have these conversations about like, should we have gotten married? And in my heart, I'm like, dude, I don't even know if I love you.
Where are we going? Where are you taking us?
Oh man,
what part of the country? Where in the world? What time frame? Where?
So, you're talking here to someone who grew up in a specific mecca of the Adventist faith. So I grew up in Loma Linda, California.
What year were you born, Michael?
96.
I was born there 13 years before that. We just missed each other.
Really? Man, so close. So close. I think some key things for the story is just, I grew up in a very faithfully, dedicated family to just wanted to do stuff for God. My mom, my dad, always involved in church. They just raised my brothers and I. I have 2 older, 1 younger brother, all boys. And it was just ingrained in us that we were to be good kids, good Christians. And that meant going to church. That meant just being a part of the faith. And it wasn't necessarily so much do, like all these things to do, but there was still this ingrained that like you had to practice your faith. And so that was how I was raised. And I loved it as a kid, man. I loved it. I loved going to church. I loved just being the good Christian kid. When I was a kid, like, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7 years old, and people would ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? My answer was, a singer, missionary, doctor. Just check all the boxes for what you could be as a good Christian when you grow up, or something to that level. I was just like, I didn't even really know what that meant, but I was just like, I want to tell people about Jesus and everything. And so, yeah, I loved Jesus. To some extent, that was just how I was raised. My parents, again, very active elders and deaconesses and things of that sort.
How do we say your last name?
Redut.
Redut.
Yes.
And it's Romanian.
It is Romanian. So that's the other part. So my parents were Romanian. They came from communist Romania. And so a big part of that too was, respect, was ingrained in our household. So my dad, he deserved his respect. My mom deserved their respect. Or rather they deserved our respect. So we were the ones who had to respect them. And there was many ways in which that took shape, but yeah, dude, it was, they roughed it out, came out to the US, and, they met out here, got married, and tried to start a life together for a family.
And so you speak Romanian?
I do. It's a little rough now, but it's in there still somewhere.
How do you say you are free from sin in Romanian?
Whoo. Okay, this is not going to sound, I'm sure there's like an actual theologically accurate way of putting those two words together, but like the word translation that I would put would be like, Tu ești liber de păcat?
So libre is free and pecat is sin, right?
Yeah.
Because pecado is sin in Spanish.
Yeah.
So it's a Romance language.
It is, yep.
Okay.
It's a little weird. It's got some, Russian influence there, or, the Slavic influence, but Yeah. And so in fact, I spent a few years of my life, like when I was just really young, in an American church. And then when I was about 10 years old, we moved our membership to a Romanian church. So that was where I learned my Romanian. Like, I was just total fly on the wall type kid. Got along perfectly with everybody, and everything was fine. And I didn't don't remember thinking about this, but I just happened to please everybody. Like, everyone was always happy with little, well, my middle name is Michael, but back then, it'd be little Brian Michael, right? Little Brian Michael was just, he made everybody happy. So, like, everything was fine. Like, when I remember my childhood, it was beautiful, like amazing, until I turned 10, like around that age. And that was when our family switched churches. So we started going to the Romanian church. I also, started in middle school. And if you know anything about middle school, it's like, that's when you actually start to like care about what people think and everything. And so very quickly, I didn't have that. I didn't feel accepted, because I like, one knows I can speak a little bit of Romanian now, but back then I didn't really know enough. And I'd be at, this church where there's Romanian speakers that have just moved from Romania and they're my age, and I wasn't accepted because I couldn't speak Romanian. I couldn't understand them. I was like the odd man out. And then I got to, middle school, and my mom raised me like they raised me to be one of those, there's a term that you might have heard. It's like a peculiar generation, right? Like, I was to be peculiar. So I was different. My mom dressed me, and so I showed up there perfectly, like having been perfectly fine with that most of my life. And now I'm getting made fun of and teased, and there's expectations that I wasn't aware of. And so my solution to it was to lie. Because I needed people to like me. Like, I couldn't describe any way other than that. It was just like, okay, what is this world where where people don't just get along and everything is beautiful? It's like, okay, how do I make this happen? And so, I remember some of the first lies I told were like to kids at school was that I could like do a kickflip. Like I could barely do an ollie, but like I just thought that would build some street cred if I could be like, I could do a kickflip, pop, shove it, and I did an impossible one. I used to skate a little bit, and so I was like, that was the lingo of my school back then. And so lying was my solution to getting attention. What's funny is it didn't work. Like I don't remember anyone being impressed or that changing anything, but that was just what I thought, like, oh, that kid is cool. And I began to just pick apart why that person had to be getting attention and liked and everything from there. And I would try to do the same thing for myself, even if it wasn't true. So lying was my solution, man. I would lie about everything. Like, so here's how it went down. I started 6th grade, which is middle school for me. And I was in like the gifted program or whatever. And so I start middle school, and I don't even know what it was, but I just didn't click, didn't do well. And school started getting rough. And so my mom's solution was like, hey, I'm going to, my grades got rough. I'm going to put you in like an independent study program and do like homeschooling. Did that for a few months. But even then, like I think I've had that my whole life. I've had like ADHD. I didn't know that when I was a kid. I didn't know nothing about it, but like I would procrastinate like the hell out of it, just never do anything until I absolutely had to. And so even the independent study program just did not work, because it was like, I would wait till the very last minute. My mom would pull out the teacher's edition and be like, all right, here's the answers. All right, figure out it and just go do it. And then so after a few months, she put me back in school because she was like, you're not doing well. And so seventh grade was like my first full year. And I just, every time my mom would be like, hey, did you do your homework? I'd be like, yes. And, you know, if the teachers were like, hey, you're failing, but I'd be like, oh, you know, they lost my assignment, or, oh, this or that, like all this sorts of crazy, you know, lies that I could come up with. And, you know, if I was playing video games with my brothers and my mom was like, hey, you guys have an hour, and an hour was like done, they would send me to go ask my mom if they could have like another 30 minutes. And I'd go, and then my mom would be like, no, you guys need to wrap up now. I'd go tell my brothers, oh, yeah, she said we can have 10 more minutes. Like, I just, like, honestly, this is not something I realized until much later, but the world was just revolving around me. And I didn't see anything, like, I saw nothing wrong with what I was doing. There was no shame, no remorse. I didn't see the harm in it. And it wasn't working. Like, I was a really good liar. Like, I could lie really well, but also I think there's just an air of dishonesty that like people could kind of pick up on.
Right.
And so, you know, even in a form of lying was like, okay, I want to be cool. Like, okay, this is actually kind of a funny story, but like growing up, I really wasn't concerned about like, you know, dating. Like, I had no interest in forming a relationship with anyone of the opposite sex or anything like that, until one of my guy friends was like, hey, who do you like? And I was like, I don't like anybody. Like, I'm perfectly fine here. I'm in seventh grade. I at that point, I still hadn't like hit puberty, and I was just like, and he's like, you gotta like someone. Like, what, are you gay or something like that? And so my response was like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna pick someone random. And like, I just chose some random gal from one of my classes that I was like, you know, she's objectively like, she's a good person to like. Like, I just picked her. And then that like, and this is so funny, man, because like the way that like truth and lies can play in your brain, because the second I said that I liked her, even though I didn't up until that point, like I didn't care, like she was like she didn't matter to me at all. The second I said that, then I was like, I have to play this role that I like her. Like, I now have to impress her. And I like overnight, I changed who I was. Like, I was just this book-loving nerd, just do well in school, keep my head down, I did not care about anything. And then immediately I was like, oh, this is what my mom's dressing me with. It's gotta go. I need real clothes. Mom, we're gonna go buy some Levi's and Vans and all this stuff. And like, it just changed. And I was like, I couldn't be, who I wanted. I was like, oh, who I think I am is not accepted. And so I have to be what people want me to be. And that just continued. You know, that's middle school, but man, that just continued through high school and on and on. And again, it never worked.
Right.
You know,
Faking it.
Never worked. Yeah. And that's the thing. People would like call me poser. You know, it's like they could tell, but I knew no other answer. I didn't know how to feel okay with who I was, you know, with who I was. And so my thoughts were like, I have to be someone else. And I really desperately wanted to be accepted and feel affirmed and loved. But as hard as I tried, it never, well, it was never there. And it was, more importantly, in my eyes, it was never there from who I wanted it to be from.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, man. So you go like this throughout high school. You didn't know any of this. This was life.
Yeah. And again, I was familiar, like, so, okay, I'm trying to think of the timeline on this exactly, but at some point in time, there was, so after seventh grade, I was homeschooled again in eighth grade because I didn't do well in seventh grade. My mom was like, we're putting you back in homeschool. And that year I was homeschooled the same year as one of my good friends from church. So I ended up having this one good friend at church, and he was also homeschooled that year, but he was like, I'm trying to think, I was the Robin to his Batman. Okay. Here's this blue-eyed, blonde French kid from, that came from Belgium, Romanian. He's Romanian Belgian. And he just, in my eyes, was like, and I think there was evidence of this, that like he was the one getting all the attention and all the affirmation, all the love. And it was just like a multitude of things, I thought, he was like, okay, he's more attractive than I was, is how I was seeing it. And, his parents seemed to have a better, understanding of taste and social connection and things like that. So like my parents weren't really doing much to help me with that, but I felt like his parents were. And so I just felt like I stood no chance against him. Like against this guy who was like supposed to be my best friend, right? And I'm over here still feeling like very just vulnerable. Like, oh, I can't really trust him because he's got a leg up on me. And at one point in time, there was a gal who started coming to our church who also moved to the area. And since both him and I are homeschooled, our pool of eligible people is small. And so we're both like, ooh, interested. And whether I knew it or not, like my answer to it was to start talking bad about my buddy.
Yeah.
Oh, he did this one time. Oh, he did this one time. Oh, like, pulling up all the dirt that I could, because I was like, I got to level this playing field, And so in that case, it was like, I knew what I was doing, but at least it was true. It's like I could lie about myself a bit, but now I'm telling true things that were not supposed to be shared or whatever. They're private things, or they're humiliating things. Again, to make me look good. And I was aware of that, but in my eyes, I was like, this is what I have to do.
Right.
And it's funny because at the same time, like, again, it was just this desperation, because in my mind, I really wanted like friends. Like I wanted to feel accepted, to feel loved. And at the same time, it was like, as I was doing some stuff, then he would sometimes do some things, and like we were friends, but also kind of not always being the nicest to each other, and just being dramatic that we could be. And so there was a lot of this like fending for myself in pursuit of affirmation, of feeling like somebody cared about me and loved me just for who I was, if that makes any sense.
For sure.
I think a lot of people kind of go through situations like that, trying to find their place in the world and value. And the answer for me came, so I'm lying and I'm trying to go about that. And eventually at some point, let's see. So I got back in high school, 9th, 10th grade, and then 11th grade, I was homeschooled again. And me and my, good friend, my best friend at the time, we just ended up kind of going our separate ways. Just unfortunately, different decisions, different priorities in life. And at some point, actually early on when I was in middle school, I get exposed to pornography, right? So I'm, even before I was, like, I'll be real, even before I had hit puberty, right? Like I get exposed and I'm confused by it, because I'm like not really, again, interested in any of this stuff. But there's a curiosity in my brain a bit, and it's like, okay, hey, that was interesting, and I don't really want to do anything with it, but And and that starts to spur more of a curiosity as well for, for the opposite sex. But then I began to, obviously hear from pastors, from preachers, in the church, just how evil, right, porn is. And right, the porn is like, hey, don't be like, that can mess up your life. It's going to turn you, like, it's so evil. And it's like, almost like Paul talks about, it's like the second someone told me that, now I'm dealing with shame.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I want nothing to do with that. But there's something in me, and I, it's hard, Rich, because like I think that, like, you have kids that just hit puberty, and just there's a natural biological process that begins, right, of interest. But for me, it's like that interest was immediately like, that is wrong. Like, even just the interest, right, even just this, like, curiosity, I guess you could say, in my head, it was like, don't entertain that. It's evil. It's corrupt. And it's like, at one point in time, and I hope my buddy listens, my old friend listens to this podcast, but I hope he doesn't mind me throwing him under the bus. But at one point in time, I mean, not throwing him under the bus or anything that, but like, I tell him, like, when I was, growing up, we were really good friends. I was like, hey, dude, like, there's this other girl, like, in our lives, a friend of ours, so barely a friend. And I was like, dude, I had a dream, and like, I was like kissing a girl or something like that, and like, she looked kind of like this girl. And he went and told her that I had a whole crazy dream about her. And so, like, in my brain, I'm also starting to feel like, hey, any thought, anything like that is just like evil, evil, evil.
Right.
And so, like, on many other fronts, I'm like, okay, I can't, but like, there's that curiosity of things, and the shame just leads to it being a place that I start to go to more and more often. Even before I understood anything, even before I really kind of like comprehend things, it was just like, I'm going there, and I'm going back there, and I'm like, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be doing this. And it's like, and that was like the one stain on my life. Like, when I'd look back, I'd be like, I just got to take care of this. It's the one thing that's driving me apart from God. And I just need to take care of it. And at first, it was just messing around, with websites and things like that I shouldn't be at. But then, I, in this pursuit of affirmation, I begin to have, like, I don't even know how it happened, but I just started messing around online. Like, not even jumping straight for, like, I just started making friends with people online, and I began to see, like, hey, I could be somebody that people like online, because I knew how to talk, I knew how to lie, I knew how to create a person that would connect with people and somehow, get along. And so that's what I would do, was I would make friends, and I had all these friends. And then I began to realize that, oh, if I sweet talk even better, here I am as a 13, 14, 15-year-old, like, I don't even know how old I was, just like connecting with people. I could say things, and there are other people and other girls who are going through the same curiosities and things like that. And we can now start to have relationships. And so I began to find that affirmation online. And I felt it made me feel good.
Sure.
Because I was like, oh, I'm not as bad as I thought I was. Like, I just need to, because I had really bad acne when I was younger too. And I knew how to use Photoshop. So, like, I was like, oh, see, if I just didn't have acne, I wouldn't look too bad.
Let's just use this brush here.
There you go.
Small brush.
There you go. Cloning tool.
Yeah,
Dude.
cloning tool. Stamp it. I'll just stamp.
And so I was like, that was what I was telling myself, was like, oh, it's just, if I looked better, people would like me. And I was also like really, really skinny. Like, I'm 6'3", and at some point I was like 6'2", 6'3", and 130 pounds.
Oh, mercy. You had to run around in the shower to get wet.
Yeah. No, really. I found like the solution to that question of like, okay, finding community and things online.
Yeah.
And I just continue to invest in that really for like, and there were times where like I'd have like an online, girlfriend or something like that. And I would stop messing around with everybody. But it was just something where, dude, like it was like almost every day I was actively talking to people, whether it was the same person and whatnot, but it was something where I was so deep into this drug
Yeah.
of affirmation, of just, just foolishness, and
Feeling the shame.
yeah. And that's the thing, there's shame. And the crazy part with it is like the shame, like, in some ways was a blessing. Cause like I never ran away from God. Like I never felt like I was so far in the deep end. And honestly, part of me feels like maybe I should have been. Like I have full forgiveness, but it's like I'm just like, God, like why wasn't I more repulsed by that? But a big part of it was just because it was solving the need that I was wanting. It was my idol, right? It was what I could trust on. When I felt dejected or I felt alone or I felt, it's like it just seemed like that was the answer. And so I just was there feeding the pigs. And at the same time, like I was saying, like I knew God was there. Like I'd pray to him. Like I had like this solid relationship that like I knew God was love. And I knew that like I needed love, because I would go to my young adult like leaders and stuff, and I'd be like, I want love. Like I want it from the community here at my church. I want it from like, I want us to talk about it because it ain't happening. Like and the hard part about like in an ethnic church and an ethnic community, and I'm sure, you grew up somewhat in a Hispanic community as well, is that there's this assumption that those in the community are your only like reliable, trustworthy people, like especially from the parents' perspective. Like from my parents, I was not allowed to hang out with people outside of the Romanian community, even if they were Adventist, even if whatever, it was either my family or other people from the church. And it's like, and we have a lot of people from my faith background in Loma Linda, as you know. So it's like, I'm sure I could have, and later on, I did find people that were more like accepting, and then I was able to be around and just actually be myself. But for so much of my life, I was not allowed that privilege, because it was like, no, they have to be in our community. And so I knew that there was a better answer, but just I couldn't find it.
Right.
And so it just, and the problem with my mindset too became that every person, every girl, like just being online and all this stuff like that became an object. Like when I'd meet them in person, you would think that I would keep it online, but it's like it began to fester into my real life, where it's like I had to have their affection. Like I needed to do whatever needed to be done to try to get it. And it was a game, bro. It was such death, because the second I would get what I wanted, they were worthless to me. Like I would talk with someone for a week, 2 weeks, and then something would happen between us. And then I was like, I would feel shame. And in my shame, I would feel put off, and I would completely reject that person whose trust I had attempted to build. And that became kind of the same pattern in my life. just people. Every time, I would meet them, it was just like, okay, I want to get your affection. I want to get your interest. And it was girls. It was also guys. And like, if I saw someone as like, hey, having some sense of like respect, popularity, I was like, all right, I got to do what I can to make that person think I'm cool. And, and if I'm feeling like, okay, God is, as a good Christian, I will take, if I find someone who I don't think is cool, I'll still spare like, I won't be too cocky or too proud. Like, I'm going to spend time with them. And, it's like, it was always this transactional level where I'm like, oh, I feel good about myself because I spent time with this person who's less than I am. It's like, it was just, weird. Yeah, it was just revolving around myself. And again, there was so much like, and I wasn't happy with it, like the whole time. Yeah. Like I would just stick in it, like, but there was also a big part of me that was like, like I said, I want something more. And that more for the first time, I'd say, came when there was my first love, quote unquote, if I could say. Like, it was the first person who I started really talking to, and we had met in person at one point in time, but then we started having an online relationship type of thing, with the premise of like, oh, she's going to be moving to the area and then we'll be able to continue this. And by then I was like 16, 17, or no, I was like 18. So I graduated high school and I'm in college, and part of it had tempered down a little bit, but like still I was like going back to the same drug, every so often, still trying to get that affirmation. And I found, I started talking to this gal, and she was the first person who I was like, oh, I can be myself. Like, I don't know what it was. It was like, I can just be me, and we're talking and we're vibing, and there wasn't any like sexual and like undertones to it at all. And I just found myself completely free from the desire to even pursue that.
What happened? Did she move to your town or not?
So I'm in love with her. She says that she likes me too. But then she's like, hey, I'm before I moved there, because she was graduating high school, different side of the country, and then going to move to California. She was like, I'm going to go visit my home country in Europe, and there's a guy I used to date that's out there, and I don't know what's going to happen when I see him. And so I was like, well, make your choice now, because I'm not just going to be your plan B. And so we ended up splitting. So this is the part where the story kind of gets interesting. We ended up splitting whatever. We weren't even really like a huge thing, and I'm heartbroken, because I'm like, I found the answer, Rich. I was like, love, safe space, security. That's what I need. So she goes over there. I don't know what happens. I never found out. But she comes back, and I hit her up. And we start to have this ambiguous relationship where it's like, we liked what we had, but we also like know there's some unspoken things and everything. And it's like, we don't really know. But I'm still like desperate, because I'm like, that was what I was searching for. Safety, security, safe space, affirmation, just love to be who I am. And I'm just like desperate for it. So like, I'm actually like, I was purposely being so intentionally like, I don't want to come on too hard, because I would notice that if I'd ask like, hey, so what happened in Spain or whatever, if I'd ask certain questions, it would just shut her down. And so I was like, okay, I gotta just be cool. And I even became, extra cool again. I started hitting the gym, and I was like, I gotta be someone that she likes, and so I started hitting the gym, which is a good thing, because like that made me feel good about myself. But I shared this story with you in Nebraska, and I just want to share the story for the world because, that was an interesting year. And the premise for this, it's going to come back up later on in the story, is the Romanian church that I grew up at, they would do these things every year called essentially promises. So at the beginning of the year, everybody would get a random bookmark with a Bible promise that one of the elders, whatever, had written down. And so it's all Bible promises that were like really cool. And you would take it, and that was your verse for the year, your promise for the year. In that year, which was in 2015, it was like 2014 was just a crazy year. Both my grandparents had passed away. I was like, I'd gone through depression, and it was just a tough year. And so 2015 comes, and I'm still on like that pursuit for affirmation. And the verse that I get is, knock and you shall see. I wish I could have memorized it perfectly. Seek and you shall find.
Knock and the door shall be open.
Knock and the door shall be open unto you. Ask and you shall receive. And I was like, all right, God, I'm going to claim this verse. And every single time I claimed that verse with full faith, it was answered. Like every time. Like you would think I would have asked like way more, like God, $1 million or something like that. But like it was just at times in my life where I was like, I desperately want, and God can't, like God would deliver. And so this gal that I was talking about, this first love of mine, who I'm like going crazy after because she showed me what it felt like to be just accepted and loved as I am. She moves to California, and I'm like hopeful that maybe something can kick back up again. And we're talking every day, but like still it's very surface level. It's like we're all like, it's kind of scary to either of us to go any further. And I get to a point where I'm like, yeah, hey, okay, she moved here, she's getting settled, and I was like, hey, we should hang out sometime. And she was like, yeah, and like we start planning like an evening time to hang out, and like there was some eclipse or solar red moon or something like that was happening, and I was like, hey, let's go see this together. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. And I'm like, sweet. So I'm all like planning for it, and I'm like, all right, and we're talking about it, but then she just goes like disappears. And she was like out shopping or something like that. So I was like, oh, her phone died. But I'm like, okay, we have plans for that night to go hang out, to go see this red moon. And I'm like, all right, well, like we weren't fully locked in. Like we both agreed to it, but like, no, we didn't set a time, a place or anything like that. It was just like, yeah, let's do it. And I'm like, but the time ticks on, and it's like getting a little later. And I'm like, man, she lives like an hour and a half away, as far as I know. It's like, I know she moved to LA, and I'm out in Loma Linda. And so I'm like, okay, well, let me just drive out that direction. And when she gets signal, she can tell me, where really to go. And so that's what I do. I drive out to that direction, and I'm like, okay, no, she's going to school in this area, so I'm going to go in this area. And I'm just hanging out in that area. And it's funny is like, God begins to talk to me. He's like, dude, just go home. It's like, don't go, don't do this. Just go home. And I'm like, no, God, like, this is what I need. This person and everything she's given me is what I need. And so God is like, to just go home. But I persist. So I get out there, and I'm out in like Los Angeles, and I have a long board. I'm just skating around. I'm not getting any messages from her. But like, she didn't even read my messages, because like it would show you if it was read. So like, I know she wasn't fully ghosting me, right? I'm like, her phone's just got to be dead. She's never done this before. We're on great terms. And so I'm just skating around, and God's like, dude, just go home. And I'm like, no, God, I'm asking, I want to see her tonight. You promised that you would answer my, that you will give it to me. So give this to me. And as I'm skating by, like just not having a clue where I was or like where she was, she, like I see a person outside, and just out of the blue, I go up to that person, almost like by the Holy Spirit kind of lead me in some way. And I'm like, and I asked the person, I'm like, hey, just out of curiosity, has anyone moved into the neighborhood recently? Like someone with a young daughter. And yeah. And I'm like, I don't know why I'm asking this question, but like God was just like, dude, fine. Here, go talk to that person. And I asked that question. That person's like, yeah, our next door neighbors just moved in, and they have a young daughter. And I was like, no way. That's too crazy. That doesn't make, like, that's impossible. I'm in just like LA. I'm in Burbank. Like, it's so big. Like, there's no way I could have been right there. And God's like, dude, I answered your prayer a little bit here. Like, you know that I'm orchestrating that I'm here. Just go home. And I'm like, no, I'm sticking around. And like, this fight happens with God for like 30 minutes or something like that. It was quite a bit. And then God's like, fine. Like, if that's what you want. As I'm skating by, I see a car pull around and she's in the car. And she didn't see me yet, but like, I see that and I'm like, that was her car. She was in the car, and she pulls into that house. And God was like, there you go. Now go home. Don't fool around. Don't mess around. Like, all that's going to happen is heartbreak. And I'm like, no, God, I'm sticking around. And so I go, sure enough, it was her house. My mind was blown as this is happening too. Cause I'm like, no way. Like, this is impossible that out of all of this, Burbank city and Los Angeles, like that I ended up right there. But I go up and we ended up hanging out that evening, and it was like, and my heart was just like on top of the moon. And I'm like, yes, this was perfect. This is exactly what I envisioned. But man, it just drove me into thinking that, again, that is rather than the online drug that I was going to, she was now that drug. And after that night, I just began to come on to her in more like an aggressive way, to be like, hey, okay, let's get, like, that was fantastic. Like, let's go out on a date. Let's do something. Let's make this happen. And she was like, not interested. And I just could not let that go. Like, I was in straight up heartbreak, and I was just reluctant and resistant. And like, from that day, it was like a whole year and a half after that, like, I was just continually like desperate for her, that I could not let it go.
So God was right.
Yeah, like 100%. Like, and I saw that, and like, it didn't, like, it kind of hit after that, but it wasn't until like a year or so later where I'm like just desperate, like calling her, and I'm like, hey, come on, like, just being a pathetic, well, I have mercy on me. I was just searching for something that I think every heart is looking for, but just in the worst place.
Man, I think we got to jump ahead a little bit.
So
let's, you went to college, you met up with Bianca. How much were you telling her about some of this stuff when you meet her and you guys are, because we heard her side of the story, but as you're progressing in the relationship, had this stuff been solved?
So the thing that was like, I mean, there was multiple things that weren't solved. No, like, none of it was solved. I would say the part that was kind of solved was when I got to university. Like, dude, God was good. Like, all my life, there's a song that says, all my life you have been faithful. And I just know that to be so true. My goal when going off to college was, I want to have a life that will give me that community, that fun, that, like, the answer to what I was searching for, because it wasn't lining up. It wasn't working, even though, I love God and all these things like that, like, just, it wasn't there. Like, the people weren't there, whatever it was, I just couldn't find the answer for what I was searching for. And so, I had my young adult, youth leader, and he was like, get baptized. And I was like, no, I don't want to get baptized, because I know that when I go off to college, I want to drink, I want to party. I don't know, maybe sleep around. I don't know what I'm planning for, but I want to
live it up.
Like, live it up. Like, I want a life that's life, And God thankfully put two things in my way to save me from foolishness. One of them was a gal that I dated, that we met. She was up in Canada. God again worked things out, and the crazy part to that is that she was Muslim, and we connected about our love for Coldplay. And I know.
Rush of blood to the head is better than Viva La Vida. What do you think?
No, man. It's all about yellow and clocks. And so
You're a nerd, by the way. All right, keep going.
I'll own it.
I love soft rock.
Let's go. Yeah, and I do appreciate that, because God used that to begin to change my relationship with my faith. Because up until then, it was just what I had to do. And I met someone who knew nothing, bro. Like you have people who don't know about God or atheists or whatever, and then maybe you have people who live in America and there are other religions and they don't really know about God. Dude, she was from Turkmenistan, which is like the second most oppressive country in the world. And so she knew nothing, zero, about who Jesus was, about what Christmas was about, anything like that. She was clueless. And God used that, dude. God worked through that relationship, because I had the opportunity to kind of share with her about what I believed and things, and really kind of put things under the microscope. It was at that time where I began to realize that a lot of what I believed about just what I had to do to, appease God and things like that, like I couldn't start off by just telling her that. Whoa. And I just began to tell her about a father who loved her. And by telling her those things, I began to also believe a lot of it. And God used that to protect me from just going into a lot of other foolishness. And then after a few months at college, I also joined a Christian club that God also used to just surround me with a community of people who I was like, oh, you mean I can talk? And again, you're going to say I'm a nerd, but I'll just do it. I could talk about Pokemon with my like friends from church. Like I hear them talking about Pokemon and League of Legends, and I'm like, wait, no, we can't do this, dude. We're in a Bible study. Like, you can't do that here, but they were doing it. And I was like, this is crazy. And then they would go from that and be like, oh yeah, I read this in my Bible, and God's been telling me this, and God's working in my life in this way, and let's pray for you. And and it changed my relationship with God, where I was like, oh, like, okay, God can be a friend, and I don't have to be someone I'm totally not. And so I joined that group, and it was, again, God worked that there was also a couple there that they poured out their love in the most, amazing way, Christ-like way as possible. And I began to want to be a part of that. So I signed on to be part of their, leadership team on the next coming year. I met Bianca that fall quarter, and I was now, and again, this is where I kept, I jumped from drug to drug, Band-Aid to Band-Aid in some ways, because this girl in Canada was kind of my drug of like, giving me that affirmation and feeling good. And it was, there was goodness there in its own way. But now I finally had friends in person that I could connect with, in a community that I could be with and have life with. And that didn't work with a long distance relationship. I felt in my mind that I had to choose. Because either one, I was going to FaceTime her and talk to her and travel up to her and make my life about that, or I was going to be pouring into these friends that I was making in my Christian club. And I decided that I was choosing my Christian club, and I was going to pour into them. And the unfortunate fact, too, is at the time I met Bianca. And I say unfortunate, not because it's very fortunate to have met her, but I also began to entertain thoughts of like, oh, hey, this person who I met isn't the only person that I could be with in my life. And I say that because as we talk about in our marriage, that was something that kind of lingered. Because Bianca knew that there was some interest that I had interest in her while I was still in a relationship. And once I started to even just entertain those thoughts of, oh, this, Bianca's kind of pretty or whatever. And the bigger thing was in my mind, I was like, oh, Bianca's excited about church ministry. In my mind, growing up with my family, it was like, that's a huge part of my life. It's a big part of being a Christian. And this, the girl I was dating at the time, she's a new believer. She's not on that yet. So she won't that will never really be a part of it. And so I just saw like that we're not compatible anymore. And so we split up, and Bianca and I, we were just doing a lot of, stuff on campus together, ministry together. I played it cool, and part of me was like, I felt responsibility for that. I was like, I can't no, I don't want to pursue a relationship with Bianca. Like, this is inappropriate. This is wrong. I shouldn't do this. Mm-hmm. But after a few months, I say few, it's like 2 months, we went to like a young adult thing, and they talked about relationships, and I was like, you know what? Hey, Bianca's like kind of a cool girl. But then actually, I remember now, I was actually like, no. Like, I saw that, and I realized that I was attracted to Bianca, and I was like, I need to put space between us. We had a conversation. I think she told you guys about it. We had a conversation. Hey, we're not really going to talk for a few months. Like, we should take some time apart because we're serving in leadership. We're doing ministry together. We can't really be dating and doing ministry together. And like 2 weeks later, we were talking. And so the relationship starts, man. The other difference between, that I saw in Bianca was this previous girl that I was dating. She was more reserved, not like a crazy adventure person. And I meet Bianca, and I'm like, oh, Bianca's up for anything. Mm-hmm. And so in my mind, I'm like, she's a better fit for me and the life that I want. Like I don't want someone to be with someone who's not going to be up to do life. And so I'm interested in Bianca, and we start dating, and that's what's driving us, is just, oh, hey, we're going to do fun things together. But then very shortly into our dating, we have sex, and that puts a bit of a damper on some things. Mm-hmm. Because now there's some shame and there's some guilt there of like, oh, like, what are we doing? And then a few months later, she has the situation that she's talked about with her MCAT and medical school, and this Bianca that I was excited about to date, is gone. Right. I'm anticipating, oh, she's going to be awesome, and we're going to be like, let's entertain people at our house. I'm imagining us getting married and doing stuff like that. And now I'm like, oh, she's doesn't want to talk to anybody. She just wants to be, isolated, alone. And in my brain, I'm just like, well, you know what? This is just her anxiety. This is just, the stage, this phase. We're just got to get through it, and then everything will be beautiful. Like, she'll go back to normal. And that people-pleasing thing in me, it just keeps coming up right at the same time, right? That was the solution things. That was it now again. It was like, hey, I just have to do this, and I just have to rise up and be the man, and just and do whatever I need to do to make her feel good, to make her feel safe, secure. But at the same time, I wasn't feeling safe and secure. I knew that she loved me, but I didn't know if she loved me for who I was or who she thought I could be. Right. And and so we were just in this place of doing our best, making the love happen, if that makes any sense. It felt in some ways kind of forced, or kind of just like, hey, we got to make this work and stuff, but didn't feel very organic. And then there were times, and this is the thing too, is that as she's dealing with this anxiety, I would blame her for things, at least in my mind, where she's we would go visit places or go to retreats or whatever, and we would meet people, and that same people pleasing thing would come out. And even like I talked about, I would see people ladies who were attractive, or who I could tell kind of were this sounds horrible, but top of the food chain in my mind at the time, right? Oh, they are the ones that other people, want. So, and there was that innate part of me that was like, all right, I need to make that person like me. I had no intention of anything happening, but I was like, I need that person to like me. You know, whether they were a girl or a guy. But then there was also this situation where, like I talked about earlier, that objectification would happen as well. Where for like, while I'm making them try to make, like, my brain was feeding and lust was forming for people in my life. And Bianca had no idea about this. And we get married, and I began to just dump everything on her at some point in time. Like, hey, I thought you were going to get over this anxiety and stuff. And she would also resent me because she could tell, man. She could tell when I was like barking up the wrong tree, you know, and I was acting weird. And, you know, there were people in our life, you know, like, or, you know, like I said, if we're traveling or visiting, and she's like, okay, you're acting odd around that person. But I'll just put it off. I'm like, oh no, you're being jealous. You're being insecure. And putting the blame on her. And like internally, like from my perspective, like part of me knew what I was doing. Part of me didn't know. Like I would think that there was issues with like maybe lust or issues with affirmation, but it was just something that I was kind of removed from.
And this is all before you guys are married.
No, even when we're married, like like I said, we get married and it starts to boil over into that, right? Like, yeah. But when we're married, now I'm pushing back on her.
Right.
So before then, I just took it.
Yeah, marriage didn't solve your problems then.
No. So
Strange.
I think yeah, exactly. And it doesn't help when you just begin to tell your spouse that all the times that you were just putting up with, you know, all these things of the past, anxiety or whatnot, were done in resentment or with expectation of
that doesn't
change.
Help. That doesn't.
No, it doesn't help.
That's not the move.
No.
I should jot that down.
And man, the hard part too is like as I was in this situation, there was serious questions, and Bianca and I were really wondering at times. Like we would have these conversations about like, should we have gotten married? And in my heart, I'm like, dude, I don't even know if I love you.
Oh man.
Because
how far into this was this going on?
Like, you know, we're a year in. We've been together for 3 years, and I'm having these thoughts, and I'm just like, I don't know.
Right.
And I'm also like looking at what's going on in my mind and what's in, behind closed doors. And I'm like, I want to love you. I really, really do. But like, there's a part of me that would just feel like, oh, with her anxiety or with her preferences or whatever, just who she was. And this sounds like crazy, right? Because it's like, why do you marry someone if this is what your thoughts are? But in my mind, I'm like, okay, I like her. She makes me happy. But I don't feel like she fits society's mold for someone that's an impressive wife.
You're pretty selfish. Old Michael's pretty selfish.
No, I was. And like, I didn't verbalize this, but it was just some level of like, man, why can't you be more that, dude, when I talked about my, well, I won't go into that, but that was like, that was in my mind a lot of times. I was like, oh, you don't want to go to potluck. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do that. Like, why can't you be more with it?
Yeah.
Like, and then anytime that she would bring something to me, my response was to sometimes just throw something back at her. And
it wasn't going well.
No, it was not. And at the same time, man, we were both being like, well, hey, we have God, like we're sticking in it, like we're a great marriage. Like there was this dichotomy of like, we've decided, we've committed to each other. And, there were moments where everything would go well. But in my mind, I just could not, like, I was just a slave to these thoughts. And this continues. There was a big part, and I don't think we'll have full time to get into it today, maybe another opportunity, but like, there were, things going on at church as well, that like I was taught that as a good Christian, you're involved with church and you're in it, you're involved. You're at Sabbath school and you're at church 90% of the time. You only don't go to church if you're not in town or you're sick.
Right.
Like that's how I was taught. And there were things going on, and just I actually made church service and ministry my mistress. Like there were evenings where I would spend from Friday night to Saturday morning at church, all night working on something, whether it was media, whether it was something with the bulletins, whatever. Like it was the most ridiculous thing.
You're crazy, dude.
I was. And
all night
mercy, by myself. Like I'm just only there in like some office, like, come on, gotta get this ready for Sabbath morning. And Bianca's over there in like our marriage isn't working out, and I'm just pouring more and more and more time into church.
Did she know anything about the porn stuff by then?
I had brought it up at some point, because like lightly, but she didn't know the extent at which it was. So it wasn't a common conversation. She didn't even think about it. I just felt like it was a personal burden to bear.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break from the episode, and I'm bringing on my sister, Jadra. Jadra, quick question. What's up? How you doing? How you feel?
Oh, man, I have God's peace. I feel great.
Oh, okay. How long has it been since you first started to understand that you were free from and dead to sin, free? How long has it been?
Oh, it's been 3.5 years. Yes.
3.5 years. That's quite a bit of time. Would you say, what would you say the gospel has done in perhaps changing your life, would you say?
Oh boy. How much time do we have? Yes, the gospel. Oh, it's just radically changed my thinking, radically changed how I see myself. I have assurance of salvation. I know my Father loves me, my Heavenly Father, and I live in abundant life. And so I'm lacking in nothing. That means I have the fullness of God's peace and His love and His joy. And so that reflects now in my marriage. My marriage is better than it's ever been. But that took some time. That took some time for Jesus to do some work. And just looking at my children in that same light, I mean, what the jobs that I do, it's changed everything, Richard, everything.
So everything, pretty much then.
Pretty much everything.
You've donated of your time, your energy, your finances to keep this message going. Why is that important to you that this message gets out to the people?
Well, when I received the gospel, God radically changed my lens of how I look at others. And it's like He zoomed me out like Google Earth. And I started to look at all the other humans on the planet literally as my brothers and sisters. And we have the same Father. And so I just want everybody to be one big happy family. I want us to all be together in the kingdom now. Like I want people to experience God's peace in their life and have true joy, not just temporary happiness. And so, yeah, it's good stuff.
That's awesome. If you're listening and you know the drill, you know what I'm about to say, lovereality.org/give. We are going for this thing, and every dollar that you donate gets this message going out there. Either the podcast, internet church, several podcasts. Jadra, you have a podcast. What's your podcast called?
My podcast is called Worthy of Everything. Yes, please subscribe.
5 stars. If you don't put 5 stars, I'm inclined to believe you're a hater.
That's right.
No, but yeah, every dollar goes to getting this movement out there. So join with us, lovereality.org/give. Anything else? What's your podcast about, Jadra?
Oh, Worthy of Everything is about how to walk out freedom from sin, identity in Christ, especially if you maybe have a history of abuse or trauma or addiction, anxiety, depression. But the over-encompassing topic is intimacy with God.
Man, that sounds awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Richard.
Let's jump ahead. How did
Let's
you
jump ahead.
find
Let's do
us? Like, what happened?
So so 2022, 2 years ago, Joel Moutre shares a podcast on his Instagram.
Love Joel. Shout out to Joel.
And I love him because this is how the story starts. And I listened to it. And again, I knew who God was. I love God. I knew he was love. Like, I could go on for
We're hanging
days.
out with him all night at the church.
Yeah. Like,
That's
I'm
where
like,
he lives.
right. And Joel talks about it, and I'm just like, I'm jiving with what he's saying. And there's some things there I'm like, okay, interesting. But that resonates. Like, everything lined up with my picture of God, actually. And I'm like, but in that the power hadn't hit. And so I take that, and I'm like really feeling filled by that podcast. And I'm like, God, there was something there. And Joel, and I reach out to Joel, and we start hitting it, connecting. And I'm beginning to be like, free from lust. Okay. Lord, I believe it. But like, there wasn't really much there. I start sharing things with Bianca to try to encourage her. So I was like, hey, Joel's story is so similar to mine. You got to listen to it. Hoping that she would also start to get the picture. It took months. It took months before she finally started getting into to listening to the podcast. And
So
then she began
you're
listening
starting
to it.
down, like you're listening to it a lot.
I listened to 2 podcasts. I listened to
Joel,
to Joel's and Floor's.
how'd you pick Floors?
I think Joel shared a reel of Floor where she talked about her story, and that's why I was like, oh, I want to go see that. So that was the only reason why I didn't listen to anyone else's, as far as I know. Maybe I did. I'm not sure.
And you were like, this is cool.
But I was like, this is cool. This is powerful. God is good. Bianca, you have to check this out. And the big part again was like, because I wanted to bring this into light. I wanted her to know. But it took her months. It wasn't until January or so of 2023 where she begins to actually listen to the podcast, and she's like, oh, and she starts listening to a lot of them, and then starts joining the Bible studies. So she would tell me about this, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, cool for you. I follow Justin Koo. I had no idea he was actually affiliated with Love Reality, but I'm just like, there's all these things, and I'm like, that's cool. It's out there. I don't really desperately need it. Until, man, so, okay, 2023, last March, Bianca and I go to Spokane. Crazy turn of events. I thank God. I thank him, because we were supposed to be in Havasu Pai, which is this big hiking trip that we were going to do in Arizona. And God sent a flood to change our plans. And we randomly were like, hey, let's go check out Spokane, because we've been thinking about buying a house. And because of my crazy church ministry affecting our marriage, which that had been discussed, I was thinking, let's just move away from this city so that I don't have to step down from church ministry. I can just do a clean cut, and we can start completely from scratch somewhere else. And we go to Spokane, and while we're in Spokane, I remember this clearly. It was a Saturday evening. We were up in Coeur d'Alene, actually. We went up to go check that out. And we were jogging, and Bianca had listened to Tyler's podcast. And she's like, you got to listen to this. It's a great, it's crazy, their lives. I think she had listened to his and Morgan's and stuff. And so she's like, that's amazing. And so I was like, oh, well, I'm listening. And so I think my phone was dead. And so we had one earbud in each ear or something like that as we were jogging, because I couldn't listen on my phone. So she's like, let's go for a jog. And I'm listening to his podcast. And as I'm listening, I feel like Paul on the road to Damascus. Because I feel completely exposed. And that week, we were there for 3 or 4 days. We finished his podcast, and I'm full of shame. Like, I was just like exposed. And Bianca had no clue. But in my eyes, I was exposed. And the big thing too is that we were talking about buying houses. So we're in Spokane and we're taking a look at houses. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to buy a house with Bianca until she knows the extent of my mess. Because there are things I haven't told her. And there are things that I don't know how she'll respond, with porn and lust and things like that, that like when she hears, she might want out. And if that's what she chooses, okay, like, but I don't, and I'm like thinking about these things. And when I hear Tyler's podcast, I'm like, even more just like, I feel crushed. I felt so crushed.
It wasn't good news.
It's like I knew there was good news there, but the road to that good news was depressing, because in my mind I'm like, I have to tell Bianca, and I don't know, because in my mind I'm like, she's not going to take this. Like, there's no way she is not going to take this. She's going to want out. Like, I know her. I know how much, like, I saw it as dependent. I felt like she was dependent on me, and so to hear that me, who she's supposed to like, love and need in this life, and who she thought I loved and all this stuff, for me to reveal this to her is she's going to say no. And so we get back from Spokane, and I'm just like, kind of just, I don't know what to say. I'm quiet that week. I don't know how to respond. And then a week later, like, well, by God's grace, she goes off to a health summit. And while she's gone, she's like, hey, join Internet Church. It's happening. And I think she had joined one of them. And she's like, you should tune in. And so, like, we can go, since we had no other way, nothing else to do that evening. So I join in. And, I was just praying to God about the whole thing with Tyler's podcast. I think I got to Morgan's, and I'm like, wow, God, you could really do this? And then we talk, and that evening, as after party, you're like, hey, so what's your story? I don't know if you remember me showing up there. I don't. You don't?
I sounds like me saying, what's your story to you, though, or to somebody. Seems like
yeah.
what I did.
You were like, hey, who are you? And man, it was funny, because that evening I was coming, guess where I was coming home from?
Spending
Church.
all night at the church.
I was doing something at church.
I think I do remember that. I think I do.
You remember that?
Yeah.
And so you asked me, you're like, hey, what's your relationship with sin? And I was offended by that. I'm over here and I'm like, dude, I am an advocate for the gospel, for God's love. Like, you don't know me, you don't know this. And your little question is a little riddle just to get me riled up or something. But when you asked that question, I was like, I forgot how I responded. But I just remember after I got off the call that evening and I was sitting with it, I was talking to God about it. And he was just like, I was in the shower, I remember this specifically, and God just told me, he was like, Brian, you need to understand something. And he just told me like who I was, and the fact that it wasn't based on anything I've done, that I could actually do what I've done 1,000,000 times over. And that wouldn't make me more worthy. It wouldn't change, anything. Like, in his eyes, I was his child because of Christ. Like, that was it. It was like there's no progress, there's no up or down, less value, low. Like, that's how I was seeing my life, right? There were some people with more value, and I'm over here and I'm trying to be valuable and build this. And God was just like, dude, like, that's all.
He's like, chill out.
Yeah. And you could hear, you can go on the Dusty Boys and hear my story about the dishes that God shared that night. But I woke up the next morning, I knew who I was.
So it's that thought that there's nothing you could do.
Yeah.
And then you realized that you didn't understand that before.
It was just it was like it was right into my veins. it's like it's hit my brain before, and I've told friends, and I'm like, I've literally preached that nothing you do can make God love you more, nothing you do can make God love you less. Like, I've preached those exact words, but it was God, just me with him being like, dude, this is for you. Like, you're free from sin. And my verse for that year, for last year, was Galatians 2:20. And that was what came to my mind when I was in that time. It was like, it's not based off anything that you've done. It's completely by faith. And do you and God was essentially extending me, like, are you going to believe it? Like, are you going to use that faith that you have and to believe that that you are righteous because I've said so? And I woke up next morning, I was like, okay, that's who I am. And it was like, right once I confessed that, like, I didn't have anyone to sit down with and talk about this with at the time. Later, like, I shared with Bianca that, like, it hit and stuff. And the big thing, as I was listening to the podcasts from then on, was just, I realized that God was telling me that, like, I had been living the lie of affirmation, of needing affirmation, and the lust and things like that were all just built on lies. And so I surrendered it to him, and I sat down with Bianca, and I had a heart to heart, and I said, hey, love, this is everything that's been going on. We were talking about buying a house. I want you to know this. And I was just amazed, because she just said, I know that you are forgiven. And I was saying things that, like, I thought never would ever come out. Like, that I could never talk about, that I should never ever say, that anyone, if you were to ask, like, hey, should you tell your wife that you've done this before or had these, like, they'd be like, no. And I was just like, do you still love me? Do you still want me? And she was just, like, all I could say is the Holy Spirit was there.
I was watching this movie last night, and I kind of recommend it, and I kind of don't. It's called Beautiful Boy, and it's about. Have you seen it?
I've read the book.
You read both of them? Because one's by the dad, and the other one's by the son.
I've read the one by the father.
Okay, so there's this one part where he's at a meeting. I don't know if it's Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotic Anonymous, and they're asking him, like, what changed? And he said, I was ODing, and I'd gone to the hospital, and some guy was like, what is even your problem? And he said, well, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm addicted to meth. And he said, no, that's not your problem. That's how you're trying to solve your problem. What's your actual problem? And he realized, oh, I've been trying to fill a hole, and the way I've been doing it is by this and that. And I thought that was so powerful. The key to changing any habit, like if we're talking about pornography, we're talking about overeating, we're talking about anger, is to understand that we usually go to it when we're trying to regulate emotions. And I think people with ADHD got more of them. I got more emotions than the next guy. And when you realized, oh, I'm trying to regulate this emotion of not being loved, not being wanted, not being accepted, from the not being able to speak Romanian to the stuff with the girls falling apart to then the shame of the pornography, which leads to more pornography. And then hearing Tyler say, oh, it was affirmation. And then you're actually being able to tell your wife all these things. Maybe we still have the habit because our brain works that way. But then regulating our emotions is how we don't go back to that habit, and how we actually, when the emotion comes, we can now change the way we think about it.
Right. And that was a big thing, because I like hearing the difference between the flesh versus the spirit, where I was like, oh, like the flesh is dead.
Yeah.
And I choose to live by the spirit. And it was like, there are habits of the flesh, and there are mindsets and solutions and things like that, like you're saying, of the flesh that I've been accustomed to for 27 years of my life. And so that does not mean that I'm not in the spirit. And so it's ultimately, like I said, like growing, and like you said, like growing in the spirit is ultimately just a everyday acknowledgement of I am who you say I am, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of what happened yesterday or a week ago or 2 weeks ago or 5 months ago or anything like that, or a minute ago. It's like, I don't allow temptation to speak, or even things I've done to speak over my life, and just be like, you know what? I am who you say I am, Father. Because it like my worth is not established by, like, on the good days, I don't have the ability to be like, yeah, I'm feeling great because I did today was a good day. I didn't do those things I wanted to do. It was all like, it was just surrendering that that's not how I'm going to live my life. I can't let my life be ruled by that because this is what Jesus said, and that's the life that he's made me for. And after that, I realized that, we had a few months where it was hard on our marriage. It wasn't like, oh, you hear that and everything was just moved right on. There were definitely like, okay, how do we navigate some of this hurt? How do we avoid, there were triggers, there were things like that that were challenging to work through. And even then, there were some parts of me that felt like it hadn't really clicked. Because like that big question, like that big thing, like I told you, like I felt still, and to some extent I was like, okay, do I still like love Bianca? Like, do I have that love innately within me? And it wasn't until the beginning of this year where like that became something that I also confessed. It was like end of last year, I confessed, I was like, Lord, this is who I am. I love Bianca, and anything that says otherwise is not true. And when I confessed that and I believed it, like there wasn't a like, all right, I'm gonna show her love. I'm gonna buy her flowers so she feels loved, and eventually I'll like actually feel like this is great. Like I did not like 2 years ago, I did not like spending time alone with Bianca. Like I wouldn't have thought that was a great time. Like as depressing and sad as that sounds. But at the beginning of this year, like after believing that, I remember I was hanging out with her. I think we went snowboarding, and it was Bianca's like first time, and so everyone else was out on the mountain. And any other time, like we've done something like this before, I would be resentful because I'm like, all my buddies are out there, and I want to go have fun with them, and I'm stuck here with my wife. Like I wish she would be better. Like that was in my mind. And I could put on the best smile and just be like, oh, I'm happy here, love. But in my heart, I'm like, And that day, I didn't recognize till the end of the day. And I was like, wait a second. I had a blast. I was in perfect peace. I didn't even think about like wanting to run off or doing that. Like she asked me, she was like, oh, do you want? I'm like, no, I'm perfect. I'm so happy to just be here with you. And just over the past few months, man, I could go on like and on and on about how God has just been teaching me and showing me things that I would have never said yes to before, things that I was, just that I couldn't have believed about myself or about our marriage, and just seeing how God has worked. Like I am so immensely at peace. Not because of anything I've done, but just because the truth.
So if we go back to that heartbroken kid who drove to Burbank, and you get to put your arm around this guy, what would you tell him?
I would tell him he doesn't need to be who he thinks he needs to be. That he is perfectly loved, accepted, righteous. He is fine and just the best kid ever, just because he's just the way he is. Just life, he doesn't need to try. There's no obligation to be somebody, to have something, to solve the problems, that it's already been taken care of.
Michael, or as I affectionately call you, Big B, you're a testimony to us. We love seeing you on Internet Church. It was awesome meeting you and Bianca. And you guys are powerful ministers of the gospel. So thank you for sharing this with us. And yeah, man, you're a blessing.
Thank you, Rich. You've been a blessing to me as well, man. Thank you so much for the ministry and just not hesitating to share the gospel.
Amen.
It's changing
Amen.
lives.
We're going to keep doing it, right? We ain't stopping.
Let's go.
Let's go.